Lebanon is one of the only countries in the world where the constitution does not just protect religion, it actually assigns political jobs based on it. The president has to belong to one religious sect. The prime minister has to belong to another. The speaker of parliament has to belong to a third. Even seats in parliament are handed out by faith, almost like a fixed quota system. No election result can change that basic structure. You could win every vote in the country and still not become president if you are not the right religion. This is called confessionalism, and Lebanon has run on it since before it was even fully independent. To understand why a small country on the Mediterranean coast built its entire government around religious identity, you have to go back to a time when Lebanon did not exist as we know it today, and when the people negotiating its future were trying to solve a problem that, honestly, nobody has ever fully solved anywhere. Before Lebanon was a country, the area was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the mountainous region at its core was already known for its religious mix. Christians, mostly of the Maronite Catholic Church, and the Druze, a smaller and quite distinct religious community, had been governing that mountain region together since the early 1800s under a kind of power-sharing arrangement between the two groups. So the idea of splitting power along religious lines in this part of the world did not start in the 20th century. It was already old. After the Ottoman Empire collapsed following the First World War, France took control of the region under a mandate from the League of Nations. France carved out a bigger Lebanon than the old mountain region, adding coastal cities like Beirut, Tripoli, and Sidon, along with the Bekaa Valley. But those additions brought in a lot more Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, along with more Druze. So the new, bigger Lebanon that France created in 1920 was suddenly a country with several major religious communities, none of which had an overwhelming majority on its own. France ran a census in 1932 to figure out exactly how many people belonged to each religious group. That census found Christians made up about 51% of the population, with Muslims and Druze making up the rest. That single number, 51%, became one of the most consequential statistics in Lebanese history, because everything that came after was built on top of it. And here's the part that gets glossed over a lot, that census has never been repeated. Not once, in over 90 years. We will come back to why that matters. By the early 1940s, Lebanon was pushing for full independence from France, and its political leaders knew they had a serious problem. Christian communities, especially the Maronites, generally wanted closer ties with the West and were nervous about being swallowed into a wider Arab, Muslim-majority region. Muslim communities, especially the Sunnis, leaned toward unity with Syria and the broader Arab world, and some were unhappy about being cut off from it. So in the summer of 1943, the president at the time, Bakara el-Kuwi, a Maronite, and the incoming Prime Minister, Riyad al-Sol, a Sunni, worked out an informal understanding between themselves and other sectarian leaders. It was never written down as a single legal document. It became known as the National Pact, and it was essentially a trade. Christians agreed to stop looking to the West for protection and accepted that Lebanon was an Arab country. Muslims agreed to drop the idea of merging with Syria and accepted Lebanon as its own independent state. To lock that bargain in, they built specific religious requirements into the top jobs in government. The president, along with the commander of the armed forces, had to be a Maronite Christian. The prime minister had to be a Sunni Muslim. The Speaker of Parliament had to be a Shia Muslim. The Deputy Speaker and Deputy Prime Minister had to be Greek Orthodox Christian. And the head of the General Staff of the Army had to be a Druze. On top of that, seats in Parliament were split 6-5 in favor of Christians over everyone else, mirroring roughly that 1932 census result. This system is often described using a word that sounds academic but is actually pretty simple: consociationalism. It just means a form of government where power is deliberately divided among different identity groups instead of being decided purely by majority vote. The thinking behind it was that in a country this fractured, a straightforward winner-takes-all democracy could tip the whole thing into conflict, because whichever group lost an election might feel permanently shut out. Guaranteeing every major group a fixed share of power was supposed to prevent that. For a while, this arrangement mostly held. But it had a structural flaw baked in from day one. It was frozen to the demographics of 1932. As the decades passed, The Muslim population grew faster than the Christian population, partly because Christian communities had higher rates of emigration and lower birth rates. By the 1960s and 70s, it was widely understood, even if nobody could prove it with hard numbers, that Muslims likely made up the actual majority of the country, while Christians still held the presidency, control of the army, and a built-in advantage in parliament. Nobody wanted to run a new census, because everyone understood what it would show, and because updating the numbers would mean renegotiating who holds power. So instead, the country just kept operating on numbers from a census taken while France was still in charge, decades after those numbers had stopped reflecting reality. On top of that, other pressures were building. Regional tensions from the Arab-Israeli conflict were spilling into Lebanon. Large numbers of Palestinian refugees had arrived. Political factions were fragmenting along ideological as well as sectarian lines. Add all of that to a growing sense among Muslim communities that they were underrepresented in a government they were paying taxes into and dying in wars for, and you get a country under enormous internal strain. That strain exploded into the Lebanese Civil War in 1975, a brutal conflict that dragged on for 15 years, pulled in foreign militaries including Syria and Israel, and killed well over 100,000 people. The Civil War finally wound down with the Taif Agreement in 1989, negotiated in Saudi Arabia. Taif did not throw out the confessional system. It adjusted it. The most significant change was that the 6-to-5 parliamentary ratio favoring Christians was scrapped and replaced with a straight 50-50 split between Christians and Muslims, which is still the ratio used today, even though Muslims have almost certainly outnumbered Christians in the country's actual population for a long time now. Taif also shifted a good chunk of executive power away from the Maronite president and toward the cabinet as a whole, which is led by the Sunni prime minister, since the presidency under the original setup had grown into an almost unchecked position. The core religious requirements for president, prime minister, and speaker stayed exactly as they were under the National Pact. Those three roles are often referred to together as the Troika, a kind of built-in triangle of power between the top Christian, Sunni, and Shia political figures in the country. Walk through how Lebanon's government works right now and you will see this system everywhere. The president must be a Maronite Christian, currently Joseph Aoun, the former head of the Lebanese army. The prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim, currently Nawaf Salam, a former judge who led the International Court of Justice. The Speaker of Parliament must be a Shia Muslim, and that job has been held by the same man, Nabi Berri, leader of the Amal movement, since 1992. Parliament itself has 128 seats, still split 50-50 between Christians and Muslims including the Druze, and those seats are further broken down by specific denomination. 34 seats are reserved for Maronites specifically, 27 for Sunnis, 27 for Shia, 8 for Druze, and smaller allocations for Greek Orthodox, Melkite Catholics, Armenian Orthodox, and other communities. Even the courts reflect this. Family law, things like marriage, divorce, and inheritance, is handled not by a single national civil code but by separate religious courts for each recognized sect. There is no civil marriage inside Lebanon at all. Couples who want one have to fly to a country like Cyprus and get married there, then bring the paperwork home for it to be recognized. As for the actual religious makeup of the country, recent estimates put Muslims at roughly 69% of the population, split fairly evenly between Shia and Sunni, with Druze making up a small additional slice, and Christians at around 30%, of whom about half are Maronite and a quarter Greek Orthodox. Compare that to the 51% Christian majority the whole system was built on back in 1932, and you can see just how far the government structure has drifted from the country's real demographics. And still, no new census. The government has consistently refused to hold one, because doing so would force a political reckoning nobody currently in power really wants. The system's defenders will tell you it kept the peace for the years it worked, and that in a country this religiously mixed, some form of guaranteed representation is safer than a pure majority vote where the largest group could simply dominate everyone else forever. There is a real argument there. But critics, and there are a lot of them inside Lebanon itself, point out that the same system has calcified corruption. Because top jobs are guaranteed to specific sects rather than earned through open competition, the same handful of political families and warlords turned politicians have recycled themselves in power for decades. Voters are pushed to think of politics as sectarian loyalty rather than policy or performance. And because no single leader is fully accountable to the whole country, it becomes incredibly easy to blame problems on other sects instead of on your own leadership. This frustration boiled over in October 2019, when mass protests broke out across the country demanding an end to sectarian rule altogether, alongside anger over corruption and a collapsing economy. Those protests briefly united people across religious lines in a way the political system itself almost never does. Then in 2020, the massive explosion at the port of Beirut, caused by improperly stored chemicals that officials had ignored for years, killed over 200 people and became, for many Lebanese, the ultimate proof that this system protects the powerful, not the public. Even Taif itself anticipated that confessionalism should eventually be phased out. It called for Parliament to eventually move to a bicameral structure, with a Senate representing religious communities and a lower house elected on a non-sectarian, national basis. That reform has never actually happened. More than 3 decades later, Lebanon is still waiting on a transition that was written into law in 1989 and has simply never been carried out. So Lebanon today runs almost exactly the way it did after Taif in 1989, a system built to hold together a country that nearly tore itself apart, using a census number from 1932 that almost nobody believes reflects Lebanon anymore, and that nobody in power seems willing to update.